Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another one of our weekly privacy chats. This is not just a weekly privacy chat this week. This is one of our privacy book club events. For those of you who catch us on LinkedIn Live, that's awesome. But for those who actually would like an email, because it seems like that's still the way of the world, and want to regularly get an email about the next book that we are discussing, so you can even read it in advance, Payal, our comms staff, will post it in the chat, and there it is, FPF Book Club. So I'm really excited that an old friend, well, she's not that old, but we go back for a good number of years, Homaira Akbari. Homaira serves on a number of public company boards, but has a long career as a senior executive at a range of companies from, and initially was a real serious scientist, still is a real serious scientist, but is one of the people who's sort of converged a deep knowledge of science and technology and corporate leadership, and now is spending a good chunk of her time sharing some of that wisdom in a number of board roles, and delighted that she took the time to condense some of this into a really useful, I learned a lot, really useful book. We'll post a link to the ebook. You can download it as a PDF or buy it like an adult on one of the in-person or online locations. We'll print that as well, so you can thumb through it and highlight the parts that are of interest. So Homaira, welcome. We first met many years ago. The Mobile Marketing Association used to have like an executive summit, and I would invite a senior executive from the FTC to go down to this executive summit. It was in the Dominican Republic, of all lovely places. This is where senior executives go, evidently, to sun and fun and learn from each other. We met at that time, and I've followed your career since. So let me jump right in. I think our audience, which is reasonably sophisticated on privacy and security and legal issues and so forth, gets that cybersecurity is important. They read about the breaches and so forth. But I think you have a very broad sense of why board of directors in particular really need to see this as a critical strategic issue, more than just, oh, of course we have to worry about cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this session. And I look forward to interacting with the audience. And thank you for everyone who is on this call. Yes, as you mentioned, I have, in fact, served on a large number of public and private boards across many different countries, majority European and the US-based companies, but also Canada. And today, cybersecurity has become really a critical strategic issue for boards. And the reason for it is threefold. One is because basically cyber breaches are becoming very broad, and there's an amplification in them in the way that first, frequency of cyber breaches have increased. The damage that they cause, both financially and non-financially, has increased. But also type of cybersecurity or cyber breaches, or that they are targeting many different verticals. It used to be the verticals of healthcare and financial services are the main target. Today, any vertical is of a target, including academia, not-for-profit, and municipalities. And that is because that there is a financial gain, what's called ransomware, in that, among other gains that these hackers would have. And the other thing is, it's also, there is a lot of also targeting of a smaller company. Again, it used to be bigger companies would get targeted, bigger or brand name companies, but now any company, regardless of size, are being targeted. Second reason for it is just generally what I call convergence of cybersecurity with different areas. One of them is being fraud. Fraud used to be a sort of a separate thing, but now it's really becoming what I call online, offline fraud. Even you see either fraud completely online, completely cyber-based, or you would see a combination of physical and online. Also convergence with what I call physical security, which had existed, but it's becoming amplifying. And then finally, related to this talk, convergence with privacy laws and privacy sort of breaches. And the third reason why this has become very important is regulatory breaches. We are all aware of Security and Exchange Commission recent adoption of new disclosure rules. We all aware of DORA, which was approved earlier this year, and it will be enacted in 2025. It is a European Union Act, which is called the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and it is basically targeted at all of financial services, not just banks, all of financial services providers, including all of their information and technology providers. So if you're a cloud provider to a bank in Europe, you know, and if you're, by the way, cloud provider in the US to the bank in Europe, you would be still subject to this what's called DORA. And we've had, of course, other regulation, NIS2, which was approved a few years ago, but got enacted or got applicable early this year. And then GDPR, that everybody knows, which was one of the earlier ones, but a very interesting one, as you know, and really the impact has been huge in terms of also cyber. So one of the things I wanted to, Jules, highlight here is what I found from the others, being on the other side of the table, being a cybersecurity expert and practitioner, and from board point of view, there's a number of things which are recurrent in all of these regulations in SCC, in DORA, but it also existed in NIS2 and GDPR and APPI, is the three areas of attention. One is, for example, just diving into SCC, they talk about enterprise risk management, that cybersecurity has to be part of enterprise risk management, as if it has not been. And the reality is it hasn't been. Today, still cybersecurity as a sector is not totally mature, but as a division, if you like, or as a practice that a company has, the bank or any others, it's still very siloed. It is not really incorporated into what we call enterprise risk management. Second point, which is again present in all of these regulations, is resilience and the testing, external testing. Again, you would say, why would the SEC insist on testing and external testing? Because the truth is, many companies are not doing that. And you have to test, you have to audit, whether it's your privacy law, whether it's cybersecurity law. And then last one, very important, is transparency. For example, in SEC, they say when you talk about your controls, your cybersecurity controls, they don't have to be perfect. You don't have to say you have had every control in place, but you have to be transparent about it. And that was the case also for DORA that talks about it, GDPR talks about it. And that is very important. And earlier you and I were speaking, we talked about John Sullivan's situation in Uber. So there it was like, you weren't transparent enough. You didn't give us all the information that you had. So those are the three interesting areas coming out of all these regulations, which is effectively addressing the shortage or gaps within companies when it comes to cybersecurity.
Yeah, you make some really interesting points that I think have added a lot of complexity, but also I think show how regulators and external actors are demanding companies act even beyond cybersecurity. The AI regulations of the world, we see demands, don't just tell us you did it right, give us the transparency so we can decide. We don't trust unless you've done red teaming or external audits and so forth. And we've learned this from the financial scandals as well, right? The regulators insist on a certain process, and that may not be intuitive to everybody in sort of technical compliance, because they're doing the right thing, they're doing the work. The notion that doing it in a way that can be documented, that can be assessed by others, that can be, and people can feel like that's a lot of bureaucracy, right? Let me just solve the problems, without appreciating that from a management and controls and a government accountability and societal accountability, those are essential, even though it might take time and expense and, might even feel like, paperwork or the like. But these are the mechanisms that society needs to be able to trust that the right things are indeed happening internally. So is it fair to say that you wrote the book for board directors, but you also wrote it for the people reporting to those board directors, so they understand what they need to be reporting up and what their responsibilities are, as well as board members appreciating kind of the new broad scope of their roles? Was that the impetus?
Absolutely. And we carefully picked the title, which is called the Cyber Savvy Boardroom. It means anybody who's in the boardroom, whether it's, the executives, N-1, N-2, they need to be savvy about cyber. And the answer is yes. It is, we find today, if you think about it, who is in the boardroom and all of the many executives above certain sort of age, when you think back to when they went to business school, to their MBA programs and other even executive programs, they weren't taught about cybersecurity, or for that matter, privacy laws as much. Now, privacy laws have been around for a long, long time, but still, they weren't this wasn't part of the curriculum that they had. Now, fast forward 20, 30 years from today, it would have been, it is in curriculum of the students or going through MBAs. And therefore, even executives the concepts of cybersecurity remains very challenging for them because it's abstract. And what is different about cybersecurity is it's very dynamic. You have an adversary across the table who is frequently smarter than you, much smarter than you. And they are always trying to find any vulnerabilities that you have. And every organization has many. And the problem is, it's not all the same. And as a result, when we wrote the book with my co-author, Shamla Naidu, we were really thinking about not just board of directors themselves or the directors, but also everyone who's reporting to them, which is why we have quite a bit of content around reporting, metrics, interaction between these individuals and the board, their responsibility, and how to go about making sure that they do the appropriate level of communication in terms of what their cybersecurity program is. They have a responsibility. I was on another presentation a few days ago with a number of board of directors, and one of them just said, I have a problem because majority of these CISOs, they don't even speak English. I mean, when I say English, they did speak English, but they speak so technical that directors just don't understand what they're saying. And therefore, in the boardroom, there is a true dialogue happening. Frequently, I have seen in my boards, the CISO would say, would present a number of its roadmap or its metrics. One director would ask one question, and CISO would answer, and that's it. There's no dialogue going on back and forth. And the book is to change that, to help directors to get very educated on one hand, and to help practitioners understand how they need to communicate and what information they need to bring up to their board in order to have an effective sort of governance process and overarching governance.
Well, let's stick with that for a second, because I know one of the challenges that we see, certainly on the privacy side, and we'll talk in a minute about the privacy and cybersecurity intersection, but one of the struggles that a lot of our stakeholders, who are very often chief privacy officers, have, they're very comfortable with operational reporting. Here's how many requests we got for deletion under the California Consumer Privacy Act, and here's how many days it took for us to respond, right? Here's how many privacy impact assessments we did, and how long it took for us to do them. So those are useful and interesting numbers, but they probably don't really tell the story of what are the big picture risks that the board ought to be thinking about. So how do you help those reporting up do more than lists of how many patches and how many systems and so on and so forth, and really give them, here's where we are in terms of how mature we are against the standards that we should be. Nobody wants to report that they've got red lights and that the enterprise is at risk. And so they drop lots of detail about work that they've done. What can we understand about that?
Yeah. So what we discussed, and I draw again on the book because this is, as you said, a very, very important topic. We did actually a series of interviews before we start writing this book with directors, asking them what they were missing, and also a series of interviews with CISOs asking them what they thought they're missing in the boardrooms. And one of the first and foremost was metrics, then was also sort of setting that risk appetite, understanding that not everything is secure. But now let's focus on the metrics part. What we basically, it's probably done first time. So far, what you're seeing in industry is exactly what you said. Effectively what we call operational metrics get reported to the board. And, just like many, if you look at ESG metrics, in one of the companies I'm involved with, we have like 180 ESG metrics. Like you can have tons of metrics, you can have hundreds of metrics, but we call them operational metrics, and they're very important. And we think that depending on what are you trying to do, what protection mechanisms that you're looking at, there are different metrics, and you should look at them, and they're all very, very important. But when it comes to the board, we believe these metrics should be presented at a committee level, should be delved into at a committee level, whether that's audit committee, risk committee, or I'm chairing safety and risk committee in one of my boards, and that's where we look at cybersecurity. But when it comes to the board, we believe that these operational metrics are one of the 5 inputs. So one of the inputs would be, okay, when you think about the board, how should the board decide? How do I determine the maturity of my program and maturity of my organization and culture? Because it's not just about program. You can have the best tools, the best technologies. If your culture is not a cyber-oriented culture, you will fail. And you will fail really badly, because 75 to 80% of breaches today still is because of a human error or human, clicking on a bad link or whatnot. So the 5 areas that we thought that the board should consider is, one of the first and foremost, frankly, is cybersecurity culture. They should assess cybersecurity culture of their organization. Second is what we call cybersecurity program efficacy and regulatory compliance. So these are metrics which we talked about. These are operational metrics, the type of metrics you were mentioning. Third would be, what is the cybersecurity threat and enterprise risk profile? Some of this comes from operational metrics, but then you have to fold in your risk management and risk profiling the way you do all other risks, so that enterprise risk management. Fourth is understanding or assessing the investment level and insurance coverage. And then the last one is assessing the organization's readiness to manage cyber breach impact. When you think about all these 5 and you actually do it in the board, then I think as a board member, you have a good grasp. So let's just, because I do believe cybersecurity culture is just quite important, and is probably the one which is not really put enough emphasis on. So what do we mean by that? What I mean by that is, first of all, of course, we have the metrics like the training and clicking on the phishing email. So those are good, but those are operational level. What you want to know is, you want to assess, do business leaders, P&L leaders are also responsible for cyber? We don't believe CISO it is, of course, CISO who has to have the strategy for cybersecurity. But if, for example, a breach happens, we don't believe CISO alone is responsible for that breach. We believe it's the business leader, the P&L owner, the country manager, the country CEO, the division CEO. They have to take the responsibility. And once they do that, and we believe that it should be part of their compensation incentive, once you bring it all the way close to the management of the business, all the way from the top, including the CEO, then we think things will change dramatically. And with CEO, just like every other problem, like let's say, you have financial issues, your profitability dropped dramatically, customers are not buying products. Isn't the CEO the one who explains why, how, what are the, how they're going to change it? It's exactly the same with cybersecurity. If the CEO is engaged, that CEO owns the cybersecurity, not to say, oh, here's the CISO. He'll explain to you what's happening and what has happened. That's where I think the difference comes, and really, really bringing cybersecurity to the boardroom. And, I know we're going to talk about it, but to me, privacy laws are very important and is intimately part of the cybersecurity in terms of how do you do protection, because the crown jewel of companies is data. Not just privacy data, not just individual data, but also company data and intellectual property data, transaction data. So one of the biggest roles CISOs have is to have a good protection and threat management for the most important crown jewel of the business, which is data.
So let's talk for a minute about the privacy security interaction. Obviously, if there's no security, then the data is not private, but the actual interaction sometimes creates tensions. The CISO maybe wants to do a lot of scanning, and the privacy officer is saying, well, wait a second, we can't do it in Germany, or we have to get consent, or well, we can't look at the personal devices because of respect for the employee's autonomy as well. So sometimes there's a healthy clash. And often good collaboration, but what the privacy field is a little less mature, I think, than cybersecurity when it comes to board reporting and boards understanding. What can you share about the interaction here?
So twofold. One is, at the time, as you know about GDPR, it was in the EU. It got adopted in 2000. It got adopted or approved in 2016. Got adopted or implemented in May of 2018. Soon after, we had a series of countries who also adopted it, and including the state of California, right, which adopted it in June 2018. And then today we have large number of countries who have, in South America is Brazil, Chile, Argentina. In Asia is Japan, South Korea, and we can name many, and including UK. Even though they exited Brexit in 2002, they actually adopted and made in effect a privacy law similar to GDPR. But when you look at that, in the beginning, the big thing was, okay, how do I make sure that I have my data centralized, separated out? I know where they are, the individual data. And how do I make sure that when users come, for example, to my website, they have the capability to choose which cookies they could use or not, or follow them. And if they want their data to be removed from my server, how do I do that? So all of that was done upfront. So there was a lot of work, and companies had to change some of their processes, policies, procedures. Now, fast forward in the countries which this has been adopted, this is well done, but we have had a number of penalties. As you know, the penalties are pretty huge, and we have had situations like that. But what is now is important is the role of that data protection officer. In some cases, you call them chief data officer, to really determine what is the data on individuals that you could use or you cannot on their transaction, for example, when it comes to the banks, that you can use and in what format that you can use, and that the training of the organization about and the employees about how you can use that, how you can process them. And of course, software programmers and data scientists. So I think that's quite important. In general, for cybersecurity, we recommend heavily minimum of 2 reporting per year to the board, but really the right thing is minimum of 4 reporting. But we have companies who are not willing to do that. Therefore, we went to what we call is the lowest denominator. But we also have companies who do cybersecurity reporting 6 times or 8 times a year. For data, the same. We believe that it should follow very similar path as cybersecurity, and that the data protection officer should do reporting to the board at least twice a year, but preferably 4 and more, depending on what business you're in.
We know that 100% compliance is never possible. 100% compliance would perhaps make it impossible for consumers to reset their passwords or to easily get the services they want. And we know that there are laws that are inconsistent. There are privacy laws that create cybersecurity risk because they maybe demand localization, and therefore you can't recognize that a bad customer, a bad IP address, a hacking activity in one jurisdiction should be recognized across all the jurisdictions that you're doing business in, because the hacker can just click and go attack a different property. But data protection law might hamper this, so it's impossible to be 100%. But it's challenging, it seems, for boards to have the judgment to say this is the right risk expense trade-off. I certainly know I get these questions all the time. There's no way I can move data from Europe to the US without technically maybe being in violation of this or that, and I'm trying to do it right, but I can't shut down the business, I can't shut down the service. And it takes a lot of judgment and kind of understanding what a regulator would think is material, what really the impact would be, what are other good actors doing, all these different trade-offs. How can board members understand whether or not they all presumably want to say, let's take a reasonable, moderate point of view, right? Let's not be the most conservative actor because that might hamper activity, but we certainly don't want to be irresponsible. But to guide in that zone, do they just rely on the CISO saying, here's the trade-off? How does that conversation work out when they don't have the insight or experience into what many companies do? Obviously, having someone like you who has that insight across, sectors, and who can say, here's for your kind of organization, here's my judgment of the right risk trade-off. But there are not a lot of people like you around, are there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the topic is pretty vast. Maybe just a little bit of focus on the data part. I mean, I think that there has been concerted effort by, for example, cloud providers, Google and Amazon just publicly announced 2 days ago that they are setting up a sovereign cloud in Europe, and everybody who has access to it will be European based, and so on and so forth. So complete 100% compliant with GDPR, and the concerns that countries, many countries and many continents are having all across the world. And that concerted effort came because a lot of businesses in Europe, major businesses, said, look, we just can't go on with this. We're not going to buy cloud services unless this is proven to us and this is done. So it's a cost for Amazon or Google to do that, but it is no way around it. So I think, the thing that, so now just taking that thought of what is important, whether it's on data side or whether on cyber side, and become on cyber side, transparency. Remember that I said that, and I think regulators want that as well. You could say, look, I know I'm not compliant here, but here's my path, here's my roadmap to become compliant in case of data. In case of cybersecurity is a little bit different. So here's why. In cybersecurity, basically, you have you have, you can't be 100% secure, and I can explain why. But let me tell you, how do you go about the risk management and risk profile setting? You basically say, okay, I know, I have to spend this much amount for my protection, and then I have detection and the threat management and remediation. So I have to spend money on it. How do I determine that money that I'm spending is right? Remember the 5, metrics that I mentioned, like, cybersecurity culture. You can spend a lot of money, but if that cybersecurity culture is bad, you're going to be breached dramatically more than your competitors. So to me, the single source of truth comes when you actually do good testing, internal testing, but external testing. It's like internal audit, external audit for accounting. And really, if you have those testing strategies well done and board members understand it, and then you perform that, that gives you the single source of truth, including, in principle, those include also your employee or lack of culture, because they try to simulate those situations where if you have bad culture, or don't have good culture of cybersecurity, you would then make those mistakes. I'm conscious we're coming to our end of our time, so Jules, I wanted to stop here.
Let's close with, if there was one quick takeaway that you hope people get from the book, what would it be?
It is the one we just talked about. I think the one thing that I have been asked at one time, even a Fortune 50 company CEO asked me, I don't understand, why can we not be 100% secure by spending enough money? And my answer is, no, you cannot. There won't be any enough money to make you 100% secure. So please don't spend all of the money. Spend the right amount. And the reason for it is basically every company has an IT legacy system, and impossible to get rid of it in very short term or even in a long term. Secondly, when every company is always, any good company is always in process of adopting new technology, new ways of doing, new processes, and new IT systems. With those, even if they have security by design, once they integrate to your IT legacy, they are going to have vulnerability. And finally, what I said early on in the call or in the presentation, you have an adversary sitting across the table, and they're just smarter than you. So they will always find vulnerabilities.
So delighted. I encourage you all to grab a copy of the book or order a copy of the book, and lots of practical takeaways, whether you are working in cybersecurity or you're working in any of the adjacent fields, whether you serve on a board or whether you need to understand how your management or you can and should be reporting to the board. Or frankly, I found it a great general introduction as well to cybersecurity concepts in a very accessible way that particularly helps those of us who might be legal or policy or government understand the broader framing. So really delighted to have Homaira Akbari with me, and good luck with the book, and hopefully we'll cross paths in the near future.
Jules, thank you so much. Thank you to my audience too.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Bye-bye.